What if the forces driving today's tensions between the United States and Iran are not new at all? What if the same patterns of power, competition, and control once reshaped an entire continent? In 1884, European leaders gathered in Berlin for a meeting that would change Africa forever. The event, known as the Berlin Conference, had one defining feature. No African leader was invited. Yet by the time it ended, borders had been drawn across lands Europeans barely understood. Kingdoms were split, communities were forced together, and millions of lives were placed under foreign rule. It wasn't just about land. It was about power, resources, and a race between empires. And today, more than a century later, those same forces still shape conflicts around the world. This is the story of how Africa was divided and why it still matters today. Long before European powers gathered to divide the continent at the Berlin Conference, Africa was already home to thriving civilizations, powerful kingdoms, and complex societies. Contrary to the outdated narratives often repeated in colonial history, Africa was not an empty or disorganized land waiting to be claimed. It was a continent rich with political systems, economic networks, and cultural traditions that had developed over centuries. Across West Africa, some of the most powerful empires of the medieval world flourished. The Mali Empire controlled vast territories and became one of the wealthiest empires of its time, largely due to its control of the trans-Saharan gold trade. Gold mined in West Africa traveled across desert trade routes and eventually reached markets in North Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe. After Mali's influence declined, another powerful state rose in the region, the Songhai Empire. At its height, Songhai controlled major trading cities like Timbuktu and Gao, which became centers of learning, scholarship, and commerce. Timbuktu, in particular, attracted scholars and students from across the Islamic world, with libraries and universities that preserved thousands of manuscripts. Further south in Central Africa, the Kingdom of Congo governed a large and organized state with a structured political system and diplomatic connections to foreign powers. The kingdom maintained trade networks and even established early diplomatic relations with European visitors, long before colonization began. Along the eastern coast of the continent, a series of prosperous city-states developed through centuries of maritime trade. These Swahili trading cities connected Africa to a vast Indian Ocean network that linked merchants from Arabia, Persia, India, and Southeast Asia. Goods such as ivory, gold, spices, and textiles moved through these ports, creating culturally diverse and economically vibrant communities. Meanwhile, in the Horn of Africa, the Ethiopian Empire stood as one of the continent's oldest continuous states. With a history stretching back many centuries, Ethiopia developed its own unique traditions, written language, and religious institutions. Its rulers governed a kingdom that maintained strong political and cultural identity even as foreign influences appeared around it. These examples represent only a small part of Africa's complex historical landscape. Across the continent, there were countless other societies, kingdoms, clans, pastoral communities, and trading centers, each with their own systems of leadership, laws, and cultural traditions. Trade connected many of these societies, not only with each other, but also with distant regions of the world. Caravans crossed the Sahara Desert carrying salt, gold, and textiles. Ships sailed along the East African coast, linking the continent to the broader Indian Ocean trading world. Rivers and inland routes connected communities across forests, savannas, and deserts. Africa was deeply connected to global networks long before European colonization intensified in the 19th century. But by the late 1800s, a dramatic shift was beginning to take place. European nations were undergoing rapid economic and technological transformation during the Industrial Revolution. Factories were expanding, industries were growing, and the demand for raw materials was rising quickly. At the same time, advances in transportation and medicine made it easier for Europeans to travel deeper into regions of Africa that had previously been difficult for outsiders to access. Explorers, missionaries, and traders began venturing further into the continent's interior. Their reports back to Europe described vast lands rich in resources and economic opportunity. These reports sparked growing interest among European governments and investors. What had once been a relationship based largely on trade along the coasts was slowly transforming into something far more aggressive. Africa was beginning to attract the attention of powerful empires eager for land, resources, and influence. Within a few decades, that interest would explode into one of the most dramatic geopolitical competitions in modern history. A race between European powers to claim and control as much of Africa as possible. A race that would soon become known as the Scramble for Africa. By the middle of the 19th century, Europe was undergoing one of the most dramatic transformations in human history. Cities were expanding rapidly, factories were multiplying, and new machines were changing how goods were produced. This period of rapid change is known as the Industrial Revolution. Industrialization created enormous wealth for European nations, but it also created a growing demand for resources. Factories required raw materials such as rubber, cotton, palm oil, copper, and other minerals to keep their machines running. The problem was that Europe could not produce enough of these materials on its own. As industries expanded, European governments and businesses began looking beyond their borders in search of new sources of wealth. Their attention increasingly turned toward Africa. For centuries, European contact with Africa had been mostly limited to coastal trading posts. European merchants traded with African kingdoms for goods such as gold, ivory, and spices. However, the interior of the continent remained largely under the control of African societies. But during the 19th century, several new developments began to change this situation. Advances in transportation allowed ships powered by steam engines to travel further and faster along African coastlines and rivers. Meanwhile, new medical discoveries helped Europeans survive diseases that had previously made travel into many parts of Africa extremely dangerous. These changes made it possible for European explorers and traders to move deeper into the continent than ever before. One of the most famous explorers of this period was Henry Morton Stanley, who led expeditions through Central Africa and mapped large sections of the Congo River basin. His journeys brought detailed information about the region back to Europe, including descriptions of its natural resources and vast territories. These reports sparked intense interest among European leaders. One of the people paying close attention was Leopold II. Unlike larger European powers such as Britain and France, Belgium did not possess large overseas colonies. Leopold believed that acquiring territory abroad would bring wealth and prestige to his country. Using explorers like Stanley, Leopold began quietly establishing influence in Central Africa. Under the appearance of scientific exploration and humanitarian work, he secured treaties and agreements that allowed him to claim large areas of land. But Leopold was not the only European leader with ambitions in Africa. Across Europe, governments began to worry that their rivals might gain control of valuable territories first. Colonies were increasingly viewed as symbols of national power and prestige. The more land a country controlled overseas, the stronger it appeared in global politics. This growing competition between European nations created an atmosphere of urgency. If one country claimed a region of Africa, others quickly moved to claim nearby territories before they lost the opportunity. Diplomatic tensions began rising as different powers tried to expand their influence across the continent. As exploration turned into territorial claims, the situation became increasingly unstable. Without clear rules, the competition for African land could easily lead to conflict between European powers themselves. To avoid this possibility, European leaders decided to organize a meeting where they could establish guidelines for how Africa would be divided among them. That meeting would take place in Berlin, and it would become one of the most significant conferences in modern history, the Berlin Conference.
By the early 1880s, European interest in Africa had grown into an intense race for territory. Explorers were mapping new regions, traders were establishing routes into the interior, and powerful governments were beginning to claim large parts of the continent for themselves. This rapid expansion created a dangerous situation. European nations were competing with one another for land, resources, and influence. Without clear agreements, this competition could easily lead to conflict between the powers of Europe themselves. To prevent this, a meeting was organized in the German capital of Berlin. The conference was hosted by Otto von Bismarck, the powerful leader of Germany. The gathering would later become known as the Berlin Conference. Representatives from 14 nations attended the conference. Among them were some of the most powerful empires in the world, including Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, and Italy. But there was one major absence at the meeting. Not a single African leader was invited. The people whose lands, kingdoms, and societies were about to be discussed had no voice in the negotiations that would determine their future. Over the course of several months, European diplomats debated how Africa should be divided. Maps were spread across tables as they discussed trade routes, territories, and spheres of influence. Rather than carefully considering the political and cultural realities of the continent, many decisions were made based on strategic interests and agreements between European powers. In many cases, borders were drawn as straight lines across maps, cutting through deserts, forests, rivers, and communities that had existed for generations. One of the most significant outcomes of the conference was the recognition of the Congo Free State, which was placed under the personal control of Leopold II. Unlike other colonies, which were ruled by governments, the Congo Free State became the private possession of Leopold himself. The conference also established a new principle known as effective occupation. This meant that European nations could only claim African territory if they could demonstrate real control over it. As a result, European countries rushed to send administrators, soldiers, and traders into the regions they had claimed. This decision accelerated the process that historians would later call the scramble for Africa. Within a few decades, nearly the entire continent had been divided among European empires. Only a few places remained independent, including Ethiopia and Liberia. For European leaders, the conference was considered a diplomatic success. It allowed them to expand their empires while avoiding major conflicts with each other. But for the people of Africa, the consequences were far more profound. The borders drawn in Berlin ignored centuries of history, culture, and political organization across the continent. Kingdoms were divided. Communities were separated. Rival groups were placed under the same colonial rule. In a matter of years, Africa was transformed from a continent of independent societies into a patchwork of European colonies. And this transformation would shape the lives of millions of Africans for generations to come. The agreements made in Berlin were only the beginning, because once European powers claimed these territories on paper, they still needed to establish real control over them. And doing that would change life across Africa in ways that no one in that conference room could truly understand. After the agreements made during the Berlin Conference, European nations began the process of turning their claims on paper into real control across the African continent. Within a few decades, most of Africa had fallen under colonial rule. Vast regions were controlled by powerful European empires such as Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, and Portugal. For the people of Africa, this marked the beginning of a new and often difficult chapter in their history. European colonial governments introduced entirely new political systems that replaced many traditional forms of leadership. In some regions, colonial authorities removed local rulers and installed administrators directly from Europe. In others, they ruled indirectly by working through selected local chiefs who were expected to follow colonial policies. These systems allowed European governments to maintain control over large territories with relatively small numbers of officials. Economically, colonial rule dramatically reshaped African societies. Many communities that had once farmed a variety of crops for their own consumption were now required to grow specific products for export. These crops, often called cash crops, included cotton, cocoa, coffee, and palm oil. The goal was to supply European industries and markets. At the same time, Africa's natural resources became a major target of colonial exploitation. Mines were open to extract gold, diamonds, copper, and other valuable minerals. The profits generated from these industries were enormous, but most of the wealth flowed back to Europe rather than benefiting local populations. Perhaps the most extreme example of exploitation occurred under the rule of Leopold II in the Congo Free State. In this territory, local communities were forced to collect rubber from forests under harsh conditions. Workers were required to meet strict quotas, and failure to do so often resulted in severe punishment. Entire villages were subjected to violence and intimidation by colonial forces. Historians estimate that millions of people died during this period as a result of forced labor, disease, starvation, and brutal repression. Although the Congo Free State became one of the most notorious examples of colonial exploitation, similar systems existed in many other parts of Africa. Colonial governments introduced taxes that forced many Africans to leave their villages in search of paid work. To earn money for these taxes, people often had to work in mines, plantations, or large construction projects controlled by colonial authorities. During this time, large infrastructure projects began appearing across the continent. Railways, roads, and ports were built to connect resource-rich regions to coastal trading centers. While these developments are sometimes presented as signs of modernization, their primary purpose was to make it easier to transport raw materials such as minerals and agricultural products to European markets. Colonial societies were also structured in ways that placed Europeans at the top of the political and economic hierarchy. In many colonies, Europeans controlled the highest government positions, owned major businesses, and enjoyed privileges that were not available to the African population. Education systems were often designed to support the colonial administration. A small number of Africans were trained to work as clerks, interpreters, or junior officials, but access to higher levels of education and political power remained extremely limited. Despite these challenges, African societies did not simply accept colonial rule without resistance. Across the continent, many communities fought back against European control. Some organized armed resistance against colonial armies, while others resisted in quieter ways by preserving their cultural traditions, languages, and social structures. One of the most famous examples of resistance occurred in Ethiopia, where Ethiopian forces successfully defeated Italy during the Battle of Adwa. This victory allowed Ethiopia to remain independent at a time when almost the entire continent had been colonized. However, for most African societies, colonial rule continued for decades. During this period, African economies, political systems, and social structures were deeply reshaped by foreign control. Even after the era of colonial rule eventually ended in the 20th century, many of the systems created during that time, including borders, economic patterns, and political institutions, would remain in place. These legacies would continue to influence the development of African nations long after the colonial empires themselves had disappeared. The division of Africa was never just about borders, it was about power, resources, and rivalry. At the Berlin Conference, European nations acted to expand influence and control wealth, reshaping an entire continent. Those forces did not disappear. Today, tensions between countries like the United States and Iran are driven by modern factors such as security and politics. But beneath them lies a familiar pattern: the pursuit of power, control of strategic regions, and influence over resources. The methods have changed, but the forces remain. Africa still lives with the legacy of borders and systems created during that era. And understanding this history reveals a deeper truth. The same forces that once divided Africa are still shaping the world today.